Alexander, an old driver desperate enough to ask for a salary advance, was already under Mark's suspicion. So Mark set a trap, a briefcase stuffed with cash left wide open in the back seat. Alexander drove in silence, never touching a cent. But later that night, a phone call revealed a truth Mark never imagined, a truth that made him question everything he thought he knew about loyalty. The gates of the Alden estate opened with their usual metallic groan, swallowing the black sedan into its manicured courtyard. Behind the wheel sat Alexander Stone, a man whose weary eyes told stories of decades spent working odd jobs, never quite enough to get ahead, never quite enough to rest. His hands, steady on the wheel, were knotted with veins and old scars, the kind that spoke of honest labor. For Alexander, this job felt like a lifeline. Driving a millionaire wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. And steady work meant food on the table, pills for his aching knees, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to help his daughter keep the lights on. But beneath his quiet composure, he carried a heavier burden, one he couldn't voice out loud. His new employer, Mark Alden, was not a man given to easy trust. He had seen too many smiling faces turn greedy. Too many workers take advantage the moment his back was turned. Jewelry gone missing, cash drawers light, even one assistant who vanished with company secrets. Mark had learned to guard not just his wealth but his heart. So when Alexander, barely a week into the job, cleared his throat and asked for a salary advance, Mark's suspicion sharpened. He studied the man across his mahogany desk, creased jacket, tired eyes, voice almost breaking as he made the request. To Mark, it looked like the beginning of another story he'd already lived, another desperate worker, another betrayal waiting to happen. Later that night, Mark confided his unease to a close friend over brandy. "They all start the same," he muttered, swirling the glass. "Good manners, polite words. Then the requests come. First an advance, then something missing. I'm not going to let another one bleed me dry." The friend shrugged. "Maybe you're too harsh, Mark. Maybe the old man's just broke." But Mark wasn't convinced. He had been fooled before, fooled enough to make paranoia his constant companion. Meanwhile, in the servants' quarters, whispers followed Alexander as he moved through the hall. Two younger staff members leaned near the kitchen doorway, speaking just low enough to seem discreet. "Did you hear? The new driver's already begging for money." One scoffed, slicing vegetables with a little too much force. "Ah, give him a month. He'll be gone like the rest. Nobody lasts here." Alexander heard them. He always did. But instead of snapping back, he lowered his head, carried his tray to his room, and shut the door softly. Inside, in the quiet, he unfolded a worn photograph from his pocket, his granddaughter, her smile faint beneath hospital lights. He closed his eyes, whispering to no one, "Just hold on, baby girl. I'll figure something out." Outside, Mark was already planning a test that would show him exactly what kind of man Alexander Stone truly was. The next morning, Mark Alden rose with a plan already brewing. If the old driver thought he could mask desperation behind polite bows and "yes, sir" replies, then Mark would strip away the mask. He summoned Alexander and handed him an envelope, the crisp sound of bills folding as he slid it across the desk. "Go downtown," Mark said evenly, adjusting his cufflinks. "Pick up a few things for me. The list is in the envelope. Pay in cash. Bring me the receipt and the change." Simple instructions, but the weight of the envelope was heavy, far heavier than the task required. Mark had slipped in twice the needed amount, deliberately leaving a temptation too large to ignore. As Alexander tucked the envelope into his jacket, Mark's eyes narrowed, searching for the slightest flicker of greed. But the old man's face stayed still, unreadable, as though he were carrying nothing more than a grocery list. Hours later, as Alexander walked through the city streets with a package tucked under his arm, two men leaning near the corner shop caught sight of him. "That's Alden's new driver, right?" one muttered, lighting a cigarette. "Yeah." The other chuckled. "Heard he already asked for money. Watch. He'll pocket a few bills and be gone before winter." Alexander overheard them. He felt the sting of their words like small cuts. But he kept walking. He thought of his granddaughter, pale and fragile in her hospital bed, tubes snaking into her arms. A single dollar stolen could mean food tonight, maybe medicine tomorrow, but it would also mean shame, something he couldn't bear to leave on her shoulders. When he returned to the mansion, Mark was waiting, seated in his leather chair, papers spread out before him, though his eyes weren't on them. Alexander stepped forward, placed the shopping bag on the table, then laid the receipt neatly beside it. Finally, he unfolded the envelope, counting out every single bill of change, every penny accounted for, before sliding it toward Mark with steady hands. The room was quiet. Too quiet? Mark glanced at the money, then at Alexander. No hesitation, no excuse, no missing bills. Is that all? Mark asked finally, his voice flat. Yes, sir, Alexander said. His tone was calm, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion, like a man carrying a weight invisible to everyone else. Mark waved him off, hiding his irritation behind a stiff smile. He had expected a slip, a mistake, some small sign of greed. Instead, he was left with a man who seemed unshakable. Later, Mark confided his frustration again to the same friend. He gave back every penny, not one missing. Either he's patient or he's playing a long game. I'm not satisfied yet. The friend raised a brow. Or maybe, just maybe, he's not like the others. Mark shook his head. No. Everyone breaks eventually. Everyone. And so, a second test began to form in Mark's mind. This one larger, more tempting, impossible for most men to ignore. The following week, Mark decided politeness and small errands weren't enough. If Alexander truly meant to betray him, the only way to know was to place temptation squarely in his path, so close he could touch it. That morning, Mark stepped into the sleek black sedan with a leather briefcase in hand. He set it deliberately on the back seat beside him, snapped open the clasps, and nudged the lid just wide enough for the contents to gleam in the morning light. Stacks of bills sat inside, thick, orderly, and undeniable. As Alexander adjusted the mirror, his eyes flicked briefly toward the back. Then he shifted the gear into drive and pulled smoothly away from the estate. For most of the ride, Mark pretended to nap, his head tilted toward the window. In reality, his gaze hovered on the reflection of Alexander's eyes in the mirror. He watched for a glance too long, a twitch of curiosity, any sign of weakness. The briefcase sat there like a silent third passenger. The car hummed down the boulevard, neon lights flickering past glass buildings. Every bump in the road sent the lid trembling, flashing another sliver of green. At a red light, a pair of pedestrians crossed in front of them. One nudged the other with a smirk. That's Alden's car, right? Yeah. Wonder how long that new driver's going to last. Old fool like him. Working for a man like that, he'll snap sooner or later. The light turned green. Alexander's hands stayed firm on the wheel. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Minutes stretched into an hour. Not once did Alexander reach back. Not once did his gaze linger where it shouldn't. When they finally pulled into the circular drive of the hotel, Alexander parked, switched off the engine, and stepped out to open Mark's door. The briefcase remained where it was, untouched, its contents perfectly in place. Mark stepped out slowly, his eyes darting between the open case and Alexander's calm posture. He almost wanted to accuse him anyway, to demand an explanation for why he hadn't even peered. But there was nothing to accuse, nothing at all. That night, alone in his study, Mark poured himself another glass of brandy, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. His hand trembled slightly. Every man has a price, he muttered to himself. Every man. Yet Alexander had walked past his chance to change his life without blinking. Mark didn't know whether to feel impressed or unnerved. But one thing was certain, the next revelation was no longer his to control. It was about to come crashing into both their lives in a way Mark never expected. It was late, the kind of night when the city slowed to a tired hum. Mark exited a boardroom meeting, his suit jacket draped over one arm, his face weary from hours of negotiation. Alexander was waiting outside in the car, as punctual as ever, the engine idling with a soft purr. The ride home began in silence. Mark leaned back against the leather, loosening his tie. Streetlights washed over the windshield in gold streaks as the sedan merged onto the highway. The steady rhythm of tires on asphalt almost lulled him into thoughtless rest until a sudden vibration shattered the calm. Alexander's phone, tucked in the console, lit up and buzzed insistently. His eyes flicked nervously to the mirror, uncertain whether to answer. Mark's voice came clipped. "Take it." Alexander hesitated, then pressed the speaker button. A woman's voice, broken and frantic, filled the car. "Dad, it's her again. She can't breathe. They're saying it's bad this time. Please hurry." For a moment, Alexander's composure cracked. His knuckles tightened around the wheel until they whitened, his chest rising and falling too fast. He pulled in a shaky breath, whispering, "Lord, not now, please." Mark's eyes snapped open. Who was that? No answer, just the heavy sound of Alexander's breathing, the soft squeak of leather under his clenched grip. Finally, he spoke, voice low, words trembling. "My granddaughter, she's fighting cancer. They say she might not make it through the night." The weight of it sank into the car like a stone. Mark sat upright, the image of the briefcase burning in his mind. The salary advance, the exhaustion in Alexander's eyes, the whispers he'd overheard among staff mocking the old man. It all fell into place. He remembered the envelope of cash Alexander had returned untouched, the briefcase left wide open. Every single test, every opportunity to take, and the man had walked away with empty hands while carrying a burden heavier than gold. The city lights blurred past as Mark stared out the window. Words stuck behind his lips. Shame pressed down on him, hot and suffocating. For years, he'd assumed loyalty was a myth, that everyone had a price. And yet here sat a man drowning in desperation who still refused to cross that line. At the next intersection, Alexander turned, jaw set tight. The car rolled toward the hospital, urgency etched into every mile. Mark said nothing, but in his silence, something inside him began to break open. For the first time in years, the millionaire felt small. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair. The kind of place where time dragged and every second felt borrowed. Alexander rushed through the double doors, his shoulders hunched as if the weight of his world lived there. Nurses guided him down a hall where machines beeped and families whispered prayers into their hands. Mark followed a few steps behind. He hadn't planned to. He could have waited in the car, but something compelled him forward, drawn by a pull he didn't fully understand. In the room, Alexander's granddaughter lay fragile against the white sheets, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. His daughter sat beside her, clutching the girl's tiny hand as if willing strength into her veins. Mark lingered in the doorway, unseen. The sight of Alexander kneeling by the bedside, tears sliding silently down his face, broke through the last layer of his hardened heart. This wasn't a man scheming for wealth. This was a grandfather watching a child slip through his fingers. The next morning, Alexander was called into Mark's study. He walked in cautiously, still carrying the shadows of the night. On the desk lay a thick folder stamped with hospital insignia. "Paid in full," Mark said. "Every bill, every treatment, every future visit covered." Alexander froze, his lips parting, but no words forming. Mark's voice was steady, but softer than Alexander had ever heard it. "I tested you over and over again. I expected you to fail like everyone else. But you didn't. Even with everything you're going through, you never took what wasn't yours. You proved me wrong." He leaned forward, folding his hands. "From today, you're more than my driver. You'll manage my household, my staff. And as for your granddaughter, she'll get the care she deserves." Alexander's chest rose sharply, his eyes flooding. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. So he bowed his head instead, his hands trembling as he whispered, "Thank you, sir. Thank you." Mark exhaled, leaning back, the weight of his pride finally slipping from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he realized something money had never taught him. True wealth wasn't measured in the stacks of bills he guarded so tightly, but in the rare souls who proved that integrity still existed, even in the face of desperation. And as Alexander left the room, the photograph of his granddaughter pressed against his heart, Mark understood he hadn't just found an employee. He had found the one thing he thought he'd lost forever: trust.